The Dominion had conquered 17 star systems in the past 300 years. They had never lost a single war. Their fleets were massive, and their weapons were powerful beyond imagination. Every species they encountered had fallen to their might within days or weeks. They believed themselves to be the supreme rulers of the galaxy, and no one had ever proven them wrong. Commander stood on the bridge of his flagship and looked at the blue planet on the main display screen. Earth. Such a small and insignificant world spinning around an average star in an unremarkable corner of the galaxy. His scouts had been monitoring this planet for nearly 60 years. They had intercepted radio signals and television broadcasts. They had studied the primitive inhabitants and their endless conflicts with each other. The reports painted a picture of a divided species. Humans fought wars over invisible lines on maps. They killed each other over different beliefs and skin colors. They polluted their own world and seemed incapable of uniting for any common purpose. Had read every report carefully. These creatures were weak and foolish. They would make excellent slaves for the Dominion. His fleet consisted of 300 warships. It was more than enough to subjugate a primitive world. Most species surrendered after seeing just 50 vessels in their skis. The intimidation factor alone usually ended conflicts before they began. Expected this conquest to be quick and painless. He planned to be drinking victory wine by the end of the day cycle. On Earth it was 3 in the morning when the alarms began to sound. Admiral Daniel Brooks was asleep in his quarters at the United Earth Defense Command when his communicator screamed to life. He was on his feet and dressed within 2 minutes. By the time he reached the command center, his heart was pounding, but his mind was sharp and focused. The holographic displays showed the incoming fleet. 300 vessels of unknown design approaching from beyond the orbit of Mars. Brooks studied the formations and the energy signatures. This was it, the moment humanity had been preparing for since before he was born. The truth was something that very few people on Earth actually knew. The governments of the world had discovered evidence of alien life back in 1987. A crashed probe had been recovered from the Pacific Ocean. The technology inside was far beyond anything humans possessed at the time. More importantly, the probe contained data about the Dominion and their pattern of conquest across the stars. The nations of Earth had faced a choice. They could continue their petty conflicts and wait to be enslaved, or they could secretly unite and prepare for the day when they came for them. The choice was obvious. Behind closed doors, the greatest rivals on Earth became allies. American and Russian scientists worked together. Chinese and European engineers shared their knowledge freely. Every nation contributed what they could to the secret project. For 60 years, humanity had been building. They constructed hidden shipyards inside hollowed-out asteroids. They carved massive bunkers into mountains and beneath the ocean floor. They developed weapons specifically designed to counter technology. And they did all of this while pretending to be the same primitive and divided species the alien probes observed from afar. The deception was humanity's greatest weapon. Every broadcast they intercepted was carefully crafted to reinforce their assumptions. The wars they witnessed were real, but the true military capabilities were always hidden. The space programs they observed were genuine, but the real ships were kept in the shadows. Earth appeared to be decades away from serious space travel. In reality, they had been ready for interstellar war for nearly 20 years. Admiral Brooks watched as the alien fleet took up position in orbit around the moon. A transmission came through on all frequencies. The message was delivered in broken English with obvious disdain in the alien voice. The Dominion claimed ownership of Earth and all its resources. Humanity was ordered to surrender unconditionally within 12 hours. Any resistance would result in the complete destruction of human civilization. Brooks listened to the ultimatum without expression. He had practiced for this moment in countless simulations. His grandfather had helped design those simulations. His father had refined them. 3 generations of his family had dedicated their lives to this single purpose. Now it was his turn to carry the torch. He opened a channel to the president and the other world leaders. They were already assembled in the emergency bunker beneath the Swiss Alps. The decision was unanimous and instant. Humanity would not surrender. Humanity would never surrender. The species that had survived ice ages and plagues and world wars would not bow to alien conquerors. Brooks authorized the Awakening Protocol. The code was transmitted to every hidden base on Earth and throughout the solar system. Bunker doors that had been sealed for decades began to open. Ships that had been dormant in asteroid hangars powered up their engines. Satellite platforms that appeared to be space junk unfolded into massive weapons arrays. The sleeping giant was rising. Commander watched his tactical display with mild curiosity as new signals began to appear. His communications officer reported strange activity on the planet's surface. His sensor operator noted unusual energy readings from several asteroids in the belt between Mars and Jupiter, dismissed these observations as technical glitches. Primitive species did not have hidden fleets. Primitive species did not possess advanced weapons. The humans were probably just panicking and activating whatever pathetic defenses they had. He ordered his fleet to begin the bombardment of major population centers in exactly 12 hours. The countdown began. 300 warships aimed their weapons at the blue planet below. The crew members went about their duties with bored efficiency. They had done this many times before. They expected no surprises. In the command center, Admiral Brooks watched the same countdown on his display. He felt no fear, only a cold and steady determination that had been passed down through generations of warriors. His daughter was out there commanding a squadron of fighters. His son was leading a ground defense unit in North America. The entire human species was about to show the universe what they were truly capable of. The clock continued to tick. 12 hours until the ultimatum expired. 12 hours until the expected surrender. 12 hours until the aliens would learn the terrible truth. Humanity was not prey. Humanity had never been prey. They were the wolves who had learned to wear sheep clothing, and now the wolves were ready to hunt. The 12 hours passed slowly for Commander. He spent most of the time reviewing reports and preparing bombardment coordinates. The major cities of Earth would be his first targets: New York, London, Tokyo, Beijing, Moscow. Once these population centers were reduced to rubble, the humans would understand the hopelessness of their situation. They would beg for mercy, and he would grant it only after they pledged eternal servitude to the Dominion. The countdown reached 0, gave the order to begin the attack. His weapons officers activated the primary energy cannons and prepared to fire. But before the first shot could be launched, the sensor alarms began screaming across every ship in the fleet. Contacts were appearing everywhere, thousands of them. Ships were emerging from behind the moon and from within asteroid fields. Weapons platforms were powering up in orbit around Earth. The tactical display that had shown a defenseless planet moments ago now showed a heavily armed and coordinated military force. Captain Grace Mitchell sat in the command chair of the battleship Ironclad. She was 42 years old and had trained for this moment since she was a child. Her mother had been one of the engineers who designed the ship she now commanded. Her father had been a test pilot for the first human stealth fighters. War against aliens was the family business. The Ironclad was one of 200 dreadnoughts emerging from hidden hangars carved into the lunar surface. Each ship was 500 meters long and bristled with weapons. Capable of firing projectiles at a fraction of the speed of light, lined the hull. Missile batteries held warheads designed to penetrate shields. The armor plating was made from materials the aliens had never encountered. Mitchell opened a channel to her fleet. Her voice was calm and steady. She gave a simple order: engage the enemy and show no mercy. The first wave of human ships accelerated toward the formation. Commander could not believe what he was seeing. His fleet was being attacked by a species that was supposed to be primitive. His shields were taking hits from weapons that should not exist. His tactical officers were reporting damage across dozens of ships. This was impossible. This was absolutely impossible. The first vessel exploded when a salvo of rounds punched through its reactor core. The ship simply ceased to exist in a flash of white light. 2 more followed within seconds, then 5 more, then 10. The humans were not fighting like amateurs. They were fighting with precision and coordination that suggested decades of preparation. On Earth, the ground forces were engaging landing parties. Lieutenant commanded a platoon stationed outside Chicago. The aliens had dropped shock troops into the city expecting to find terrified civilians. Instead, they found fortified positions manned by soldiers who had been waiting their entire lives for this fight. Watched through his scope as soldiers advanced through the streets. They were tall creatures with skin and 4 arms. Their armor was sleek and their weapons looked advanced. But humanity had studied captured technology for 60 years. They knew exactly where the weak points were. He gave the order to fire. His soldiers opened up with weapons specifically designed to penetrate armor at the joints and neck seals. The first wave of aliens fell before they even knew they were under attack. The second wave tried to take cover, but the humans had planned for that too. Explosive drones hidden in buildings detonated and collapsed structures onto enemy positions. The ground commander reported to with panic in his voice. The humans were not surrendering. The humans were fighting with weapons that seemed designed specifically to kill. The humans were winning. In orbit, the battle was turning into a disaster for the Dominion fleet. Captain Mitchell coordinated her forces with cold efficiency. She directed her ships to target enemy engines first and leave them drifting. Then they would finish them off. It was brutal and effective. The ironclad took several hits from energy weapons. The alien cannons were powerful enough to destroy most ships in the galaxy with a single blast, but human armor absorbed and dispersed the energy. Scorch marks appeared on the hull, but the ship kept fighting. They had never encountered a species that could take their best shots and keep coming. Commander ordered a tactical withdrawal. His fleet had lost 40 vessels in the first hour of combat, 40 ships destroyed by a species that was supposed to be primitive. His ancestors would be ashamed. His superiors would be furious. But staying and dying would serve no purpose. He needed to regroup and assess this unexpected threat. The fleet retreated beyond Mars. Captain Mitchell did not pursue immediately. She needed to assess her own losses and coordinate with the ground forces. The first phase of the battle was over, and humanity had won decisively. But she knew this was only the beginning. The aliens would come back with more ships and more determination. Admiral Brooks received the battle reports with quiet satisfaction. Human losses were minimal. A few dozen fighters and 2 frigates. The ground forces had repelled every landing attempt with overwhelming firepower. They had learned a painful lesson about underestimating humanity. He opened a channel to his daughter. Commander Amy Brooks had led a fighter squadron against the enemy flanks. She reported all pilots accounted for and ready for the next engagement. He told her he was proud of her, and she replied that she was just doing what the family had always done, protecting humanity from those who would do it harm. Across the world, people were watching the battle footage on their screens. For 60 years, the true military capabilities of Earth had been kept secret from the general population. Now everyone understood why their governments had worked together in the shadows. Now everyone understood why resources had been diverted to mysterious projects. Humanity had been preparing for war, and that preparation had just saved the species from enslavement. Commander sat alone in his quarters and stared at the casualty reports. 3,000 soldiers dead on the ground, 40 warships destroyed in orbit, tens of thousands of crew members lost, all against a species that his intelligence reports had described as primitive and weak. Someone had made a terrible mistake. Someone had underestimated humanity in ways that had cost the Dominion dearly. He began composing his report to the High Council. They would want to know everything about this strange and dangerous species. They would want to know how a single planet had managed to bloody the nose of the mightiest fleet in the galaxy. They would want to know what they were really dealing with, and would tell them the truth. Humanity was not prey. They were predators who had been hiding in plain sight. And now the hunt was on. The fleet held position beyond Mars for 3 days. Commander used this time to repair damaged ships and request reinforcements from the nearest Dominion outpost. He also began interrogating captured human soldiers hopping to understand how this primitive species had become so dangerous. The prisoners confused him. They did not beg for mercy. They did not offer information in exchange for better treatment. They sat in their cells with calm expressions and answered questions with simple statements. Name, rank, serial number, nothing more. Had seen many species break under interrogation. These humans seemed almost bored by the process. On Earth, Admiral Brooks was coordinating the next phase of the defense. The initial victory had been important, but he knew the real fight was coming. They would return with more ships and different tactics. Humanity needed to be ready for anything. His daughter Amy arrived at the command center for a briefing. She had been promoted to commander after her performance in the first battle. 27 enemy fighters destroyed by her squadron with 0 losses. She had inherited her mother's skill and her father's determination. Brooks looked at her and saw the future of humanity in her eyes. The briefing covered intelligence gathered from captured. Dr. Hayes led the xenobiology team that was studying the alien prisoners. She had spent her entire career preparing for this moment. Her grandmother had been one of the scientists who examined the first crashed probe back in 1987. 3 generations of her family had dedicated themselves to understanding the threat. Hayes explained what they had learned. They came from a world with a stable climate and abundant resources. They had never faced serious competition during their evolution. Their rise to dominance had been almost peaceful compared to human history. They conquered other species easily because those species had never encountered true violence before. Humanity was different. Humans came from a world that constantly tried to kill them. Ice ages had forced them to adapt or die. Predators had hunted them. Diseases had decimated their populations. And when they ran out of natural enemies, they had turned on each other. Thousands of years of warfare had shaped human beings into something they had never encountered before. Brooks nodded as he listened to the report. He understood this history better than most. His family had fought in every major conflict since the American Revolutionary War. His ancestors had stood at Gettysburg and stormed the beaches at Normandy. They had frozen in Korea and sweated in Vietnam. Each generation had passed down the lessons learned in blood and fire. They saw human conflicts as evidence of a weak and divided species. They could not understand that these wars had actually made humanity stronger. Each conflict produced new weapons and new tactics. Each defeat produced new determination. Each victory produced new confidence. Humanity had been sharpening itself against itself for. Commander learned this lesson during his next interrogation session. A human sergeant named Price sat across from him with a broken arm and blood on his face. The man had been captured after his unit was overrun during a landing operation. He had killed 7 soldiers with his bare hands before being subdued. Demanded to know why humans fought so hard. Other species surrendered when defeat was inevitable. Other species valued their lives over pointless resistance. Why did humans keep fighting when they had no chance of winning? Price laughed at the question. He told about a place called Thermopylae where 300 warriors had held off an army of thousands. He told him about a fortress called the Alamo where soldiers fought to the last man. He told him about a city called Stalingrad where millions died fighting over frozen rubble. Humans did not surrender because surrender was not in their nature. The sergeant leaned forward and looked directly into the alien commander's eyes. He explained that every human child grew up hearing stories of their ancestors standing against impossible odds. Every human soldier carried the weight of that history into battle. To surrender was to betray everyone who had ever fought and died for something greater than themselves. Found himself disturbed by these words. They had conquered many species, but none of them had possessed this kind of cultural memory. None of them had built their entire identity around resistance and sacrifice. Humanity was not just a species. It was a civilization forged in endless conflict. Meanwhile, Admiral Brooks launched a series of probing attacks against the position near Mars. He wanted to keep the enemy off balance and gather intelligence about their capabilities. Commander Amy Brooks led one of these raids personally. Her squadron caught a supply convoy trying to reach the main fleet. The attack was swift and brutal. Human fighters used hit-and-run tactics that the aliens could not counter. They would appear from behind asteroids and fire their weapons before disappearing again. They tried to pursue, but their ships were slower and less maneuverable. Amy destroyed 3 transport vessels and damaged 2 escorts. Her squadron suffered no casualties. She reported back to her father with a grim smile. They were learning that space was not safe for them. Every asteroid could hide an ambush. Every moon could shelter a strike force. Humanity was fighting a guerrilla war among the stars. Received the news of the convoy attack with growing frustration. His reinforcements were still days away. His damaged ships were taking longer to repair than expected, and now the humans were actively hunting his supply lines. This was not how conquest was supposed to work. The conquered species was supposed to cower and wait for death. The conquered species was not supposed to fight back with such vicious effectiveness. He returned to Sergeant Price for another interrogation. This time he asked a different question. He wanted to know how the humans had developed such advanced technology in secret. He wanted to know how they had built a fleet capable of challenging the Dominion without anyone noticing. Price smiled and gave a simple answer. Humans were good at keeping secrets when survival depended on it. They had spent 60 years preparing for this war. Every scientist and engineer had dedicated their lives to the project. Every soldier had trained for combat against forces. The entire species had worked together in secret for one purpose: to ensure that when the aliens came, they would find not sheep but wolves. Sat back and considered these words carefully. He was beginning to understand that the Dominion had made a terrible miscalculation. They had looked at human conflicts and seen weakness. They should have seen a species constantly training for war. They had looked at human divisions and seen vulnerability. They should have seen a species capable of uniting against a common threat. They had expected easy prey. Instead, they had awakened something ancient and dangerous. The reinforcements arrived on the 7th day. 50 additional warships joined Commander's battered fleet. Fresh troops replaced the soldiers lost in the ground campaigns. New supplies filled the cargo holds of transport vessels. The Dominion was not going to abandon this conquest. They had too much pride to retreat from a single primitive world. Admiral Brooks watched the enemy fleet grow on his tactical display. He had expected reinforcements. They would never accept defeat without trying again. But this time humanity would not wait for the attack. This time they would take the fight to the enemy. Captain Grace Mitchell received her orders with satisfaction. Operation Thunderstrike called for an all-out assault on the position near Mars. The human fleet would engage the enemy directly while Special Forces teams conducted boarding operations. The goal was not just to defeat the aliens. The goal was to capture their command ship and force a surrender. The human fleet departed Earth orbit in waves. Dreadnoughts formed the core of the formation, with cruisers on the flanks and fighters screening ahead. 200 major warships and thousands of smaller vessels moved through space with coordinated precision. It was the largest military operation in human history. Commander detected the approaching fleet and ordered his ships into defensive formation. He had studied human tactics during the previous engagements. They favored speed and aggression. They used their smaller fighters to distract while their larger ships delivered killing blows. He would counter by keeping his fleet tight and concentrating fire on the enemy dreadnoughts. The two fleets met in the space between Earth and Mars. The battle began with a massive exchange of fire. Rounds and energy beams crossed the void. Missiles spiraled toward their targets while point defense systems tried to intercept them. Ships on both sides took damage, and some were destroyed in the opening minutes. Captain Mitchell directed the ironclad into the heart of the enemy formation. Her ship took hit after hit, but the armor held. Her weapons crews fired continuously. Enemy vessels exploded around her. The chaos of battle would have overwhelmed most commanders, but Mitchell had trained for this her entire life. She knew exactly what to do. The human fighters performed brilliantly. Commander Amy Brooks led her squadron through gaps in the formation. They targeted engines and weapon systems with surgical precision. Disabled ships drifted helplessly while their crews scrambled to restore power. The fighters then moved on to new targets, leaving destruction in their wake. Sergeant Price had been liberated from his cell when human forces boarded a damaged cruiser. Now he was leading a Marine team through the corridors of the enemy flagship. His broken arm was wrapped in a combat splint, and a captured alien weapon was in his good hand. He should have been in a hospital. Instead, he was doing what humans did best. The boarding operation was brutal and close quarters. Soldiers fought desperately to defend their command ship, but the humans had studied alien physiology for decades. They knew that had slower reflexes than humans. They knew the aliens were vulnerable to sudden loud noises. They used grenades and rapid assaults to disorient and overwhelm the defenders. Price led his team toward the bridge. They encountered resistance at every junction, but they pushed through. Marines fell, but others took their places. The advance never stopped. The humans fought with a fury that terrified them. These creatures had no fear. These creatures would not retreat. These creatures were relentless. Commander realized his flagship was being boarded when the explosion started. He ordered all available troops to defend the bridge, but his communications were being jammed. Human soldiers had infiltrated the ship's systems and were disrupting command and control. The situation was rapidly spiraling beyond his ability to manage. Outside, the battle was reaching its climax. Admiral Brooks directed his forces with the calm precision of a chess master. He saw openings and exploited them. He saw threats and neutralized them. The fleet was being systematically dismantled by an enemy that was simply better prepared. Captain Mitchell destroyed the second-in-command's vessel with a concentrated barrage from her main guns. The ship split in half and tumbled through space. Other human captains were achieving similar results. The enemy fleet was losing cohesion as ship after ship was destroyed or disabled. On the bridge of the flagship, Sergeant Price and his remaining Marines breached the final door. They poured into the command center with weapons blazing. Officers fell at their stations. Guards were cut down before they could react. Within seconds, the bridge was secured. Commander found himself facing the human sergeant he had interrogated days earlier. Price's face was covered in blood, and his eyes burned with an intensity that made the alien commander step backward. Behind him, the remaining dropped their weapons and raised their hands. The fight was over. Price demanded surrender, not just of the flagship but of the entire fleet, looked at the tactical display and saw the truth. His fleet was broken. More than half his ships were destroyed or disabled. The humans had lost perhaps 30 vessels in exchange for over 100 warships. This was not a battle anymore. This was a massacre. The commander lowered his head and spoke the words of surrender. He transmitted orders for all surviving ships to cease fire and await human instructions. The battle was over. They had been defeated completely and totally. Admiral Brooks received the surrender with quiet dignity. He ordered his forces to accept the enemy capitulation and begin rescue operations for survivors on both sides. Victory was complete, but he took no joy in the killing. He had done what was necessary to protect his species, nothing more and nothing less. Captain Mitchell stood on her battered bridge and looked at the debris field that had once been a fleet. She felt tired more than anything else. Generations of preparation had led to this moment. 60 years of secret work had produced this victory. She wondered what her mother would have thought if she could see this day. Commander Amy Brooks landed her fighter in the hangar of a captured cruiser. She removed her helmet and breathed deeply. Her squadron had performed beyond expectations. Not a single pilot lost in the final battle. She closed her eyes and allowed herself a moment of relief. The war was not over yet, but the hardest part was behind them. Sergeant Price stood guard over Commander as human officers took control of the flagship. The alien commander looked at him with something that might have been respect. Price did not care about the alien's feelings. He cared only that his people were safe. Everything else was details. The battle for the solar system was over. Humanity had won. The High Council convened in emergency session when they received Commander's transmission. The Great Hall on there had witnessed many historic moments over the centuries, but nothing like this. A Dominion fleet had been defeated by a species they had considered primitive. A Dominion commander had surrendered to creatures they had planned to enslave. The very foundations of their empire were shaking. Appeared on the main display screen with human officers standing behind him. His voice was heavy with shame, but his words were clear. He detailed everything that had happened since the fleet arrived at Earth. The hidden human fleet, the advanced weapons, the impossible ferocity of human soldiers, the complete destruction of forces. The council members listened in stunned silence. Some refused to believe what they were hearing. Others demanded immediate retaliation. A few wiser voices counseled caution. If the humans had defeated one fleet so decisively, they could do the same to others. The Dominion needed to understand what they were truly facing before committing more forces. Admiral Brooks appeared on the screen next to. He was an older man with hair and steady eyes. His uniform was simple compared to the ornate robes of the council members, but something about his bearing demanded attention. This was a man who had commanded the defense of an entire world and won. He spoke slowly and carefully so the translators could keep up. Earth did not seek conquest. Humanity had no interest in dominating other species. They wanted only to live in peace and explore the stars on their own terms. But any species that threatened humanity would face the full power of their military. The Admiral described what the Council had not seen. The weapons platforms in Earth orbit capable of destroying entire fleets from a distance. The factories on Mars producing new warships every day. The millions of trained soldiers ready to deploy at a moment's notice. And most importantly, the unity of an entire species dedicated to defending itself. The council members exchanged uneasy glances. They had built their empire on intimidation and superior force. No species had ever resisted successfully. No species had ever fought back with such effectiveness. They did not know how to respond to an enemy who refused to be conquered. Captain Grace Mitchell was assigned to oversee the prisoner exchange that followed the initial negotiations. Thousands had been captured during the battle. Many of them were frightened and confused. They had been taught that the Dominion was invincible. Now they were prisoners of a species they had been told was barely civilized. Mitchell treated the prisoners with respect and dignity. She ensured they received medical care and proper food. She allowed them to communicate with their families. Some of them were surprised by this treatment. They had expected torture and execution. Instead, they found themselves treated as guests rather than enemies. One young officer asked her why humans were being so kind. They had won the war. They had every right to take revenge for the attempted invasion. Why show mercy to those who had come to enslave them? Mitchell thought about the question for a long moment. She told him that humanity had learned many lessons during their long history of warfare. One of the most important was that cruelty bred more cruelty. Vengeance created cycles of violence that never ended. The only way to build lasting peace was to treat former enemies with the respect you wanted in return. The officer did not fully understand, but he nodded thoughtfully. Perhaps these humans were more complex than the Dominion had believed. Perhaps they were capable of more than just destruction. Commander Amy Brooks was chosen to lead the first human diplomatic mission to the. Her ship carried ambassadors and scientists rather than weapons. The journey took several weeks through unfamiliar space. She used the time to learn everything she could about culture and customs. The ship arrived to find a world in turmoil. News of the defeat had spread throughout the Dominion. Subject species were beginning to question authority. Some were openly discussing rebellion. The empire that had seemed eternal was showing cracks. Amy met with the High Council in the same great hall where they had watched her father's transmission. She presented humanity's terms for peace, full recognition of Earth as an independent world, trade agreements that benefited both sides, cultural exchange programs to build understanding, and a mutual defense pact against common threats. The council debated for 3 days. Some members wanted to reject the terms and continue the war. Others recognized that defeat was inevitable if they kept fighting. In the end, pragmatism won over pride. The Dominion accepted humanity's terms and signed the first treaty between their species. On Earth, the news was greeted with celebrations. People danced in the streets of every city. Fireworks lit up the night sky. After 60 years of secret preparation and days of brutal combat, humanity had secured its place among the stars. They were no longer alone in the universe, and they were no longer vulnerable. Admiral Brooks stood on the observation deck of the orbital station and watched the celebrations below. His daughter was a hero. His species was safe. The work of 3 generations had finally paid off. He allowed himself a small smile and then returned to planning for the future. Sergeant Price received a medal for his actions during the battle. He shook hands with world leaders and posed for photographs, but he felt uncomfortable with the attention. He had simply done his duty. Millions of others had done the same. The victory belonged to everyone who had sacrificed for the cause. Captain Mitchell was promoted to admiral and given command of the first deep space fleet. She would lead humanity's exploration of the galaxy beyond the Dominion. There were other species out there waiting to be discovered. Some might be friends, others might be threats. Humanity would be ready for whatever they found. Dr. Hayes continued her study of biology and culture. She found that the aliens were not so different from humans once you looked past the surface. They had families and dreams and fears just like everyone else. Perhaps the future would bring true friendship between the species. Commander returned to his as a defeated general. He expected disgrace and punishment. Instead, he found himself consulted as an expert on humanity. His reports became required reading for every Dominion officer. He spent his remaining years trying to explain the strange and wonderful species that had humbled his empire. The galaxy had expected to find easy prey on that small blue planet circling an average star. Instead, they discovered that the most dangerous predators in the cosmos were also capable of extraordinary compassion. Humanity had proven its strength in battle. Now it would demonstrate the greater strength required for building peace. The stars would never look at Earth the same way again, and Earth would never stop looking at the stars.